Hello and welcome to The Thoughtful Humanist. I'm Liz Franklin-Kitchen, Humanist Chaplain at the University of Surrey. And today, we're getting all emotional. We're at a really exciting time right now. We're halfway through LGBTQIA Awareness Month. On Friday, we celebrated both Charles Darwin's 212th birthday and Lunar New Year. And today is Valentine's Day. So what a lot we've got going on. Emotions run high, they also run low. Sometimes we don't even know what direction they're going in. Emotions are incredibly important to pay attention to, so it's worth understanding them, especially as the theme for this year's LGBT month is all about body, mind and spirit. In Darwin's book, The Expression of the Emotions in Man and Animals, he describes how our emotions are fundamentally rooted in biology. Author and psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk tells us that emotions are the indispensable source of motivation to initiate action. From the Latin emovere, to move out, emotions give shape and direction to whatever we do, and their primary expression is through the muscles of the face and body. What this means is that we express emotions in order to indicate that we're moving from one state to another. It's the quickest way to communicate to someone else that something is happening for us. Watch how this baby shows incredible depth of emotion as she listens to her mother singing.
You don't know, so I'll let you in, knowing tomorrow I'm gonna wake up missing you, wake up missing you.
So have a think about how we emote, how we express ourselves when we're scared, joyful, in love, lonely. And think about how our outward demonstrations of emotion are magnified when we're with other people. When we find something funny, we smile and laugh, but have you ever noticed that we laugh way more if we're watching a comedy with friends than if we're on our own? This doesn't happen by accident. This is deeply rooted in our ancestry. As social creatures, we have always communicated through our emotions and with our bodies so that we can remain connected with our tribe. And this goes back to way before we developed the ability to speak. So emotional language existed for hundreds of thousands of years before we developed spoken language as we know it today. When we're upset or grieving, our faces indicate deep sadness. All these emotional expressions are designed through evolution to alert other people to a specific need that we have in that moment, to tell people we need comfort, friendship, and connection. If you saw my previous episode, I spoke about the importance of developing language to articulate our needs, and this is true. We also find great benefit from learning to connect with ourselves and each other on a more emotional level. So, as we move through the semester, the invitation is to consider our relationship with our emotions, how we connect with each other through emotional communication. Through this practice, we start to experience a shift in ourselves as we explore what happens when we give ourselves permission to feel and to express our emotions. I'm always keen to hear from you and love the discussions that arise out of our mutual interest in what it's like to be human. So do get in touch with me by phone or email or book a one-to-one session with me if there's anything that you'd like to chat about. For now, I hope you have a wonderful Valentine's Day and I'll see you next time.